My name is Sandra. The cold Massachusetts courtroom still haunts my memory. The air was thick with tension, and the marble floor echoed with each step I took. As I pushed open the courtroom doors, my mother, sitting in the front row with immaculate hair and soft, pink, painted lips, rolled her eyes at me, as if victory was already hers. But then, Judge Thompson looked up. His eyes widened in shock, and without thinking, he blurted out, "Wait, the charges are against you." The room fell into a stunned silence. My parents, Elizabeth and Henry Grant, stared at the judge, completely bewildered. Little did they know who I had become and what I'd been preparing for over the years. Let me rewind. I grew up in a mansion in Connecticut, a far cry from the loving family portrait one would expect. My parents were high-flying socialites, always chasing the next big event in New York City. They lived just a 2-hour drive away, yet it felt like they were a world apart. When I was just 2 months old, they left me with my grandparents, temporarily, while they sorted out some business in the city. That temporary turned into my entire childhood. My first memories are of my grandmother, Amelia, a warm-hearted and gentle soul. Her study was filled with the smell of old books and freshly brewed tea. She'd sit at her antique desk, writing poetry, and when I'd crawl up to her, she'd stop and tell me stories about the stars. "The universe is full of magic, Sandra," she'd say with a twinkle in her eye. She never made me feel like I was a burden, just a precious part of her life. My grandfather, Judge Alexander Reed, was a pillar of integrity. Every evening, after coming home from the courthouse, he'd swap his robe for a cozy sweater and join me in the living room. "What new adventures did my little detective have today?" he'd ask, and I'd tell him all about my games and discoveries. I naively thought every child had a childhood like mine until I started school. At school, other kids had parents taking them to art exhibitions, science clubs, and playdates. I had only my grandparents, who would make up for their absence with double the love and support. When I asked why my parents never came, Grandma Amelia would say, "They're building a great future for us, dear." I wanted so badly to believe her, but even at 6 years old, I could sense the growing distance. When my parents did visit, it was always grand but hollow. Elizabeth would arrive in a designer outfit, kiss the air near my cheek, and then engage in small talk with the house staff. Henry would pace around, checking his phone constantly, impatient to leave. They were more interested in keeping up appearances than actually being a part of my life. But my grandparents never bad-mouthed them. They always saw the best in everyone. Grandpa used to say, "Justice is like a long, burning candle. It may flicker, but it will never go out." He was there for every milestone of mine, from my first day at school to my high school graduation. While other kids were dreaming about their family's wealth and inheritance, I dreamed of the warmth of his study and the sound of his bedtime stories. The first major crack in my already fragile family structure appeared on a rainy summer day when I was 20. I'd come home from university to surprise my grandparents. To my horror, I found Grandma Amelia in the garden, unconscious. She'd suffered a heart attack. The doctors couldn't save her. Grandpa was devastated. He sat in her study for days, surrounded by her books and poems, saying nothing. My parents showed up at the funeral, late as usual. They stayed for a few minutes, exchanged a few polite words, and then left. That was the day I stopped making excuses for them. After Grandma Amelia's passing, my relationship with Grandpa grew even stronger. We'd spend Sundays in the garden, replanting the flowers she loved so much, and talking about life, law, and the importance of truth. As the years went by, I graduated from law school and became a well-respected attorney. Grandpa was my biggest cheerleader, beaming with pride at every accomplishment. My parents? They sent a generic postcard with a brief message. "Good work. Keep it up." This was their version of love. Then, one fateful day, at the age of 89, Grandpa passed away peacefully in his sleep. The house felt empty without him. It was as if a part of its soul had left. At the reading of the will, I expected some of his old books or a trinket as a keepsake. Instead, the lawyer handed me his entire estate, including the mansion, his savings, and investment accounts worth over $5 million, along with a sealed letter that read, "You earned this with your love and loyalty, not by blood." I held that letter so tightly, my hands ached. 30 days later, Mark, my close friend and colleague, called me from his office. His voice was hesitant. "Sandra, your parents have filed a lawsuit. They're claiming you unduly influenced your grandfather to rewrite the will." I burst out laughing at first. They think I manipulated an old man for his money? But as the reality sank in, that laughter turned into a bitter taste in my mouth. That night, I went to Grandpa's study. I found a large folder labeled Finance. Inside were years of records, monthly transfers to my parents, notes about their requests for more money, and my mother's letters begging for help. Over the years, Grandpa had given them a total of over $1,200,000. He knew they were greedy, and he'd prepared for this day. I sat in the dark, surrounded by the evidence, and whispered to myself, "You saw them clearly, Grandpa." I was angry, but it was a cold, calculated anger. Mark warned me that the lawsuit would be a storm, but I was ready. Within a week, the local newspapers were filled with headlines, "Attorney accused of manipulating retired judge." Reporters camped outside my office, and colleagues who once respected me now eyed me with suspicion. Sometimes, I even wondered if I was the villain in their story, but I refused to let them win. I spent days gathering evidence, bank statements, emails, and witness testimonies. I crafted a case that was airtight, just like Grandpa taught me. As the trial date neared, my fear faded, replaced by determination. On the day of the hearing, Boston was blanketed in snow. The city looked like a winter wonderland, but inside the courtroom, it was a battlefield. I walked in, my heels clicking on the floor, projecting an air of confidence I didn't always feel. My mother's lawyer, Mr. Harris, was a smooth-talking man with a penchant for drama. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a tragic case. A loving daughter, Elizabeth Grant, has been unjustly deprived of her rightful inheritance by a scheming granddaughter." He gestured towards my mother, who dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. When it was our turn, Mark stood up. He presented the evidence calmly and clearly. "Your Honor, the evidence shows that Judge Alexander Reed was of sound mind when he made his will. It also shows that the plaintiffs, Elizabeth and Henry Grant, received over $1,200,000 from him over 30 years, while visiting him fewer than 10 times in total." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Mr. Harris called my mother to the stand. She sat down, composed herself, and began, "My father was everything to me. We were very close, but after my mother died, he became distant." Mark cross-examined her. "Mrs. Grant, according to the records, you visited your father only twice in your daughter's first 5 years. Can you explain why a man you claim to be so close to would send you large sums of money while you rarely visited?" My mother's voice trembled. "He wanted to support me." Mark pressed on. "Financially, maybe, but emotionally, you've been absent. When was the last time you had a real conversation with him?" She hesitated, looking at my father for support. I don't remember." Then it was my father's turn. He fidgeted on the stand. Mark asked him, "Mr. Grant, did you attend your daughter's law school graduation?" He stammered, "We were busy with work." Mark projected a photo on the screen, me, in my graduation gown, with Grandpa beaming from the front row. "You weren't there, but he was," Mark said firmly. Mr. Harris made one last attempt. "Your Honor, grief and old age can cloud a person's judgment. My clients are victims of a misunderstanding." Judge Thompson nodded. "Let's hear from the defendant." I stood up, took a deep breath, and addressed the court. "Your Honor, my grandfather raised me. He taught me the value of honesty and justice. If I wanted his money, I could have done many things differently. But all I ever wanted was a family that loved me." The courtroom was silent. Even Mr. Harris had no comeback. Mark handed Judge Thompson the letter Grandpa had written for me. The judge read it, his expression softening. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that Judge Alexander Reed's will was a true reflection of his intentions. The plaintiff's claims are baseless. The case is dismissed, and the defendant is awarded legal fees, Judge Thompson announced as he struck the gavel. My mother gasped, and my father slumped in his chair. As the courtroom emptied, my mother approached me, her voice trembling. "Sandra, can we talk?" I looked at her, seeing the woman who had abandoned me so many times. "There's nothing to talk about, Elizabeth. My real family is the one that was always there for me, Grandpa and Grandma." She started to cry, but I felt nothing but a sense of closure. I walked out of the courtroom, the cold air hitting my face. Reporters swarmed around me, but I walked straight through them, not saying a word. Back in my car, I sighed with relief. The silence was no longer lonely. It was a hard, won victory. Grandpa was right. Justice may be slow, but it always arrives. It took me a long time to realize that family isn't defined by blood, but by those who show up when it matters most. In the following years, I continued my career as a lawyer. 3 years after the trial, I was appointed to the bench where Grandpa once sat. I sat in his old chair, touched the gavel, and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa." As I grew older, I visited the cemetery where my grandparents were buried. I'd bring flowers and sit there, lost in thought. The wind would rustle the leaves, and I'd imagine I could hear Grandpa's laughter. Family isn't about bloodlines. It's about presence, love, and the memories we share. I learned this lesson too late for my parents, but in time to save myself.